Hello, I'm Jameson Steed here with Superman Comic a Day. As I promised, I will be doing a Superman comic a day starting from 1938's Action Comics #1. And due to that, I don't really have a lot of time to edit these videos, so we're just going to have to put up with every problem, pause, or break I'm going to run into. I'm reading these from a script, and I'm not very good at keeping eye contact with the video while reading from a script. So we're just going to have to deal with it. It's going to be fine. It's probably not going to be fine, but it's going to be fine. And before we get into Action Comics #1, we have to talk about Superman's creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. I will keep this short. Both men were from Cleveland, Ohio, though Joe Shuster was born in Toronto, Ontario. I don't know why I have to put a break in between both of them, but for some reason I constantly get thrown off by saying Toronto. They meet in high school, and at 18 years old, they essentially create Superman and the entire superhero genre. Two Jewish 18-year-old teens creates the superhero genre in Cleveland, Ohio. I mean, it had to be somewhere. But Cleveland? I don't know why I'm picking Cleveland. It just sounds funny that the entire superhero genre started in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places. Jerry Siegel, the writer, did a lot of writing in high school. He wrote for his school paper. He would write science fiction magazines with Joe Shuster after they meet. The very important thing we kind of need to talk about when it comes to Jerry Siegel is his father ran a tailor shop, and one day it was robbed, and he ran after the guys. There was a shooting, and he died of a heart attack. So Siegel creates a bulletproof father figure after his own father is killed in a shooting-related accident. I cannot speak to the psychology of that. I'm sure people have who are way more qualified than I am. I'm just pointing that out. Joe Shuster, on the other hand, is a scrawny, short man and was constantly picked on. As a result, he ends up getting really into the strongmen of the time, like Jack LaLanne, and just like an absolute devotee of their writings and teachings. And that will show up in Superman. He loves to do panels explaining to kids like how to make themselves stronger. Probably pretty out of date at this point, but he does that. And he is who designs the original Superman costume that doesn't really go all that altered in 70 to 80 years. It's just iconic. You're not going to be able to change it. It will always look funny if you try to change it. I'm sure someone could try something, but the red underwear has to stay. Or else there's just not enough red in that area. It looks wrong. It just looks wrong. And if you're wondering about the underwear, in the 1930s, strong men in circuses wore an outfit very similar to what Superman was wearing. So that kind of material, usually spandex, there's a reason for it, circus strongmen, would wear and tear, especially in the crotch area, very easily. So they would have to like double wear or put underwear out in front of their outfits. And that's why Superman has underwear out. He's the first, he's the biggest, everyone follows suit. And that's the underwear. That is the simplest explanation of why he wears underwear outside the front of his costume. It's nothing more than strongman, circus strong. Okay, so we're going to get into Action Comics #1. It's where we have to start. It's an anthology series. There is several other characters who I'm sure have their fans. Don't know anybody who likes Tex Thompson or Pet Morgan, but statistically there has to be a fan. They are completely forgotten about. They do not show up pretty much after they are pushed out of that comic. But we do get like 4 Superman stories in like the 14 pages allocated to Superman, and he's on the cover. Plus DC Universe Infinite, where I'm reading a lot of these, only has the Superman stories. So even if I wanted to, and I don't want to, that's about 60 pages of comics. That is a lot to get through. Only has the Superman stuff. So we're only focusing on the Superman stuff. And yes, I know there was a rough draft version of Superman that Siegel and Schuster did, who looked more like Lex Luthor and was based on the teachings of Nietzsche. We're not doing that. That character has very non-existent relation to Superman other than the name. But this is Superman in the comic book. So we start with what it was originally called National Allied Publication. It won't be DC for a while. I will try to keep track of when that exactly changes. I don't know off the top of my head. I have a lot of comic knowledge that no one should have. That's just completely useless to me. I do not know when the exact date that changes, but it is National Allied Publications. It will become National Periodical, which is how I think of it at this time. It's not actually that yet, but we'll get to that. Most of the comic book superheroes in this publisher would sort of begin with a page recapping, explaining the origins of a character. Not exactly the recap page Marvel has right now, but it would give you an idea of who the character is. And this is a Superman that's like still in the oven baking, so he is definitely not the Superman we all know and love. And he won't be for a long time. When we start talking about the evolution, and I'm doing videos on that eventually, that won't be for a while to really see that change. He has no parents. He was raised in an orphanage by mainly a doctor and a nurse from the look of it. The caption calls them attendants. In fact, a lot of this page is pretty vague, except for the part about him being able to jump 1/8 of a mile. No, he can't fly. He cannot fly. There's no mention of a lot of other of his powers. He can raise tremendous weight. It's not very clear what a tremendous weight constitutes as, but he can lift a tremendous weight. Can he lift a planet? Can't say. Can lift a car. But if you try to lift a planet, which is a tremendous weight, I don't know. I do know later versions of Superman can. I don't know about Golden Age, who can only jump 1/8 a mile. It also says nothing less than a shell bursting can pierce his skin. Don't know what that means. Bullets don't hurt him, but arguably a bullet is a shell blasting out of a casing. But bullets do not hurt him. Let's make that clear, because Siegel loves to have people shoot at him. Bullets do not work on Superman. That's one thing Jerry Siegel wants to get across about Superman. It's that bullets do not work against him. Anyway, we get into the actual plot. It's a bit disconcerting that the first time we meet the Man of Steel, we see him jumping around at night holding a bound and gagged woman for reasons not explained for a few pages. So Superman leaves a bound and gagged woman alone on the governor's lawn. He tries to get through a servant, but the servant won't allow him, so he pushes his way through, tears open the governor's door, which is a steel door. And by his door, I mean his bedroom door. He has a steel door. I don't know how commonplace that was, or even commonplace today a steel door on the governor's bedroom door would be. But it's here. He confronts the governor with a confession from the woman he has tied up. Turns out she murdered someone. Not only that, another woman is about to be put to death for that murder at midnight that night. This is also how Jerry Siegel really loves to resolve Superman stories, is Superman just kind of forces a confession out of somebody. One of two ways, that or he threatens them until they leave town. Those are the two ways Superman deals with the threats of the comic. The governor calls to stop it, and this story is basically resolved. We don't even see the bound and gagged woman again. He just mentions she's on the lawn. I don't understand why you would choose to open a story about the greatest superhero ever, or the first superhero ever, and the very first thing we see him do is not actually heroic. He's just kind of carrying a poor, defenseless woman. I mean, we find out she's a murderer, but not the best way to introduce him. The next story sees Superman confront a wife beater who passes out fairly quickly after seeing how powerful Superman is. I mean, he's no match against somebody who can raise tremendous weights. I know I'm not. The third story has Superman appear as Clark, giving us the first appearance of Lois Lane, and though an unnamed editor-in-chief, I kind of assumed this was Perry White. I have read some Golden Age stories beforehand, and this character is rarely named. He's actually George Taylor, who is a prototype. He's a prototype Perry White. He doesn't really do much other than yell at them or give Clark a story to cover. That's all he does. They go around like 19 issues without saying his name. And I only found it out by double checking like Comics Vine and the fandom wikia to make sure I was getting all my facts right. I generally would forget the one-off characters in each issue's name. Even like immediately after reading them, they're not fairly remarkable. But he's George Taylor. So I will refer to him as George or Taylor or editor-in-chief or just chief like they call him, which continues into the belief that he would be Perry White. They also work for the Daily Star. Siegel's really into naming things Star at this point. Several things will have Star in the title. And though the location is never made clear, the general assumption is it's Cleveland, Ohio until it's actually called Metropolis. We should just have the assumption it's Metropolis because as far as I know, and I've read 30 issues ahead, I never saw the name Cleveland, Ohio said in the comic. It only was said once Metropolis showed up like 20 issues later. And George Taylor doesn't have a very consistent design throughout these comics. He goes from like a 30 to 40-year-old strong-jawed man to being kind of overweight and balding. He's not even consistent in most stories. He's barely in this one. But they clearly did not know what he looked like for a lot of his tenure as the editor-in-chief. Clark asks out Lois, who is rather cold towards him. She eventually agrees. She's generally cold towards everyone at this point. They go dancing. Some tough named Butch tries to cut in. Clark tries to handle him non-violently. That doesn't work. Lois insults him, as she always does, because pretty much every time Lois and Clark go out, he gets picked on, she gets mad, he doesn't do anything. She leaves. And she leaves. So as she's trying to leave, Butch and his guys just kind of kidnap her. It's the first Lois kidnapping. Because by law, she needs to be put in danger. It's what she kind of is here for, and that's unfortunate. Lois will evolve and get to do a lot of things later on, but right now, she's a damsel in distress. I'm very sorry about that. And Superman ends up catching up to his car and picking up kind of like the cover. The covers don't really have anything in relation to do with the actual story, but here's the closest we get to that. And that's him picking up this car. The final story sees a war in a made-up country of San Monte. Clark is sent to... I try to refer to him as either Superman or Clark, depending on where he is in the story. There actually isn't a huge difference between their characterization right now. But I will screw that up a lot. So Clark is sent to cover the San Monte story. As Superman, he does a little investigating about the San Monte War. Turns out that a war manufacturer is paying off politicians to make this war happen so he can make a lot of money off of it. That's fairly true to now. The story ends in kind of a cliffhanger. Mostly it just ends with Superman confronting him and starting to bully him. And that's where it ends. It's not even a cliffhanger. But this will be the full story for Action Comics #2, which I'm covering tomorrow. We don't get much of Clark, but he is at least slightly nebbish. None of his dorky, bumbling self I usually think of him. That's not always constant with his depictions, but it's not exactly here either. Also, Superman seems to be an urban legend. No one really... Like, George Taylor doesn't know who he is. When Lois pitches it, he thinks she saw something. So he's kind of like Batman right now. Or like an opening of a Batman story. Of a Batman origin where he is kind of like an urban myth. Which also feels off when it comes to Superman. He is more of like a character in the daylight who is there to represent hope and honesty and truth, justice, in the American way. It's weird for him to be sort of in the shadows fighting crime. Schuster's Heart is really hard to read. It's not really his fault, and I have no artistic skills, so I always feel bad about attacking other people's artistic skills. I just kind of try to talk about how to the extent of how it's telling the story, and it's not very well. Siegel's overwriting. Every page has just a tremendous amount of dialogue, and it feels like they're trying to fit in so much in each one of these panels that these characters are kind of smushed and have very little detail, and there's so many lines to create shadowing that it just doesn't look good. And when you really see it once the story is republished in Superman #1 next to a story they just did that they clearly had more time to work on, it is just a drastic change. Where Superman is much cleaner, there's these bright pastel colors, and then you go right to the story and it's night and day. And overwriting in comics will be here to stay. It's still even a problem today, not as bad as it was. But Siegel seems to be like narrating everything, even though we're seeing it. Comics is a visual medium. I can see what's happening. You don't have to narrate that. In his defense, there are, due to the limited amount of pages they have to work with, several times where Superman is described as doing multiple things while we only see him, like, say, dive. So it's a cheat that doesn't really work well. He will improve. He won't successfully pull it off every time. But this is the first comic book. Comic books before this were reprints of newspaper stories. They were a collection of newspaper daily strips in one book. There weren't like original comic book stories. And we're going to have to experiment with the medium before we can get it working. So we'll be talking about that evolution as well. And Siegel ends up doing that. He does improve. For those types who complain that comics should not be political, this is a story that ends with Superman pushing around a millionaire who caused a war. It seems pretty political to me, but who's to say? No, it's political. I don't know where I'm going with that. It's political. Sometimes I just don't think through things I say. It's 100% political. It is a Superman story that a lot of people would hate right now. So that's it from issue 1. Really looking forward to cracking into the future issues and seeing how he evolves over time, and to see what happens to this war profiteer in Action Comics #2. If you enjoyed this video, I will be doing Action Comics #2 tomorrow. These might improve. I don't really have a lot of time to edit, like I said, so I'm just going to have to deal with how my pauses like there. And everything else. I had to read this from a review I wrote a month ago. If you want to actually read these ahead of time, they're on supermancomicaday.com, which I run and have been for the past month. I am currently writing the 35th day as of today. And my Twitter is at LastNobleSteed at twitter.com. I sometimes tweet. I can't say most of the time I find what I have to say very interesting, but I do. So I'll see you guys tomorrow for Action Comics #2. Have a great day. I need to rest my voice for a bit.